Research Methodology and Academic Writing Series arranged by the Research and Postgraduate Department of English in collaboration with the IQAC Sri Sankara College, Kalady. Today, we have the first inaugural lecture of the webinar series, Navigating Issues of Research by Dr. A. Joseph Dorairaj. I invite Dr. Anjana Shankar, Head of the Department of English, Sri Sankara College, Kalady, for the welcome address. Anjana ma'am, you're muted.
Respected resource person of the day, Professor Joseph Dorairaj sir, Sri C.P. Jayashankar sir, the Chief Operations Officer of the Adi Shankara Group of Institutions, participants from all over the country who have come online to attend this lecture series, my dear colleagues and beloved students, a warm good evening to one and all of you. This webinar series on research methodology is indeed a dream come true for all of us in the department, as we had been planning along these lines ever since our postgraduate department was upgraded into a research department late in 2018. Meanwhile, we happened to listen to Professor Dorairaj's talk in a neighboring college on the evolution of literary criticism into theory, and since then we wanted to invite him over to our department for a talk. Moreover, our research scholars too were highly impressed by his work, frequently asked questions on research in literature and language, which they found very handy, and hence we count it as a blessing to have him as our inaugural speaker in this lecture series. On behalf of all of us assembled here, let me welcome you to this inaugural function. To perform the formal inauguration, we have with us today Professor C.P. Jayashankar, sir, the senior-most faculty member of our department, who is currently on long leave, serving the management as the Chief Operations Officer of the Adi Shankara Group of Institutions under the patronage of Sringeri Shankaracharya. With more than 30 years of teaching experience behind him and language degrees that CELTA into, he has contributed much to the academic development of our institution. We are all happy to have him in our midst. And as a matter of formality, let me welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much.
This lecture is being co-hosted by the college IQAC, a vibrant body that masterminds most of the academic activities of the college, that is spearheaded by... Am I not audible? Am I not audible? Am I not audible?
You are.
Okay, because I'm getting some messages, that is why. Sorry, this lecture is being co-hosted by the college IQAC, a vibrant body that masterminds most of the academic activities of the college, and it is spearheaded by the coordinator, Dr. Preeti Nair, who is also a member of the department and a research supervisor. To felicitate the function, on behalf of the IQAC, we have Dr. Mini Kalady, a live-wire faculty member of the Zoology Department, and let me welcome her to our midst. This lecture series, which started off as a simple affair, suddenly took wings, and at present, the registered participants have crossed over 4 WhatsApp groups into the 5th, forcing us to live stream the lecture on YouTube, a responsibility entrusted in the experience and reliable hands of Sri Prasad, the faculty member of the economic department and a close friend of ours. And I welcome him also to this gathering. Before signing off, let me welcome each one of the participants and wish you an academically enriching experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjana ma'am. Now it's my pleasure to invite Sri C.P. Jayashankar, Chief Operations Officer, Adi Shankara Group of Institutions, for the inaugural address.
Dr. Anjana Shankar, the head of the department, resource person, respected Dr. A. Joseph Dorairaj, my colleagues in the department, Dr. Mini KD, member of the IQAC of Sri Sankara College, faculty, research scholars, and dear students. It's pleasing to note that the Research and the Postgraduate Department of English is organizing a lecture series on research methodology and academic writing in association with the IQAC of the institution. I'm told that there are over 1,500 registrations for the seminar, which is a very, very encouraging sign. It's good to see the interest that is being generated in research among the younger generation. There has been a great impetus for pursuing research projects in recent times. In this context, I would like to make an observation. I do not know whether if you agree with me on this, but most of the research work has the award of a PhD from a university as its direct goal, unlike in earlier times when research was conducted with an intellectual curiosity. Very often, securing a certificate from the target university signals the end of research work and interest in the specific area on the part of the candidate. A practical, utilitarian approach towards the conduct of research seems to have diluted selfless involvement and approach. There is also a greater emphasis on theory that compels the researchers to frame the research according to the contours of the stipulated theory. True research spirit lies in finding a methodology and a procedure that give full expression to genuine and original investigative impulse. It's my sincere hope that this lecture series would be an attempt at bringing back the true dynamism involved in the conduct of the research. The current selection of speakers, themselves very experienced researchers and guides, I'm sure they will lay out an ideal path for aspiring researchers. They will also offer their expertise in securing the relevant research material, in effective time management, in logically structuring their arguments, leading to the desired conclusion. May this lecture series guide young researchers towards this golden philosophy and principle of research. It shouldn't be a fear of plagiarism, but getting into the right procedure of research that ought to be the guiding factor in the research careers of the upcoming generation. I would like to thank Dr. Anjana and my colleagues in the department for this opportunity. My days as a faculty in this institution are numbered as I'm at the fag end of my career as a teacher. This is an institution I walked into as a 15-year-old for my studies way back in 1981 and went on to spend the best part of my life in this campus. So naturally, there is a bonding. It's a very strong bonding. I'm very proud to see the institution doing well. I'm very proud to see the department doing well. I would love to see this department come out with more initiatives without ever losing the student-centered, the student-friendly approach, which has been a hallmark of this institution. I wish the lecture series and all the researchers the very best in life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Dr. Mini KD, Department of Zoology, Sri Sankara College, Kalady, for the felicitation.
Thank you. Respected Sri C.P. Jaishankar, Chief Operation Officer, Adi Shankara Group of Institutions, Dr. Anjana Shankar, the Head of the Department of English, the Program Coordinators, the Resource Persons, Research Scholars, and my dear students. Today, I am greatly privileged to be here in this occasion and so happy to see one of my friends, Dr. Priya, as a resource person. Academic excellence is not only the ability to score high marks or rattle the English language with much rapidity and fluency. It goes beyond that, and the ability to cope with the changing world, solve problems, and will equip for the future. Once again, Postgraduate Research Department of English is here with yet another relevant topic of interest, research methodology and academic writing. It is really an incredible opportunity for all the participants to learn more in these areas. On behalf of IQAC of Sri Sankara College, Kalady, and on my personal behalf, I wish all the success for this program. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. I invite Anupa CR, Research Scholar of the Department of English, Sri Sankara College, Kalady, and faculty member, Maharajas College, Ernakulam, for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Lindsay. Now we have come to the end of the inaugural session, and I feel honored and happy to propose vote of thanks. First, let me extend my sincere gratitude to P.P. Jayashankar, sir, Chief Operations Officer, Adishankara Group of Institutions, for being with us this evening, and also, sir, for giving us insight into the true spirit of research. Thank you so much, sir. Now, let me thank Dr. Mini ma'am, IQAC member, for her relentless support and time. Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, though we are a part of that family, I still extend my thanks to the Department of English on behalf of all the research scholars and the head of the department, Anjana ma'am, for planning such a series of lectures. Thank you so much, ma'am. Finally, I wish to thank Professor Joseph Dorairaj, sir, for finding time to be with us. And also, sir, we are eagerly waiting for your talk on navigating issues of research, which we are sure will be very helpful for us. Now, I thank everyone present here and for the interest you have shown right from the beginning of the announcement of this lecture series. Thank you once again, Sri Sankara College and Department of English. Thank you.
Thank you, Anupa ma'am. For our inaugural session today, we have with us Dr. A. Joseph Dorairaj, Professor, English and Foreign Languages University, Gandhigram, Rural, deemed to be University, Dindigul, Tamil Nadu. He was the acting Vice Chancellor of Gandhigram Rural University from 2013 to 2014. He was a Fulbright Scholar in 2014 and visited educational institutions in Washington, D.C., New York, and Miami, and was an Erasmus Mundus visiting scholar at Catholic University Leuven, Belgium in 2015. He conducted a month-long teacher training program in Kandy, Sri Lanka in August 2007. He has also visited Gregorian University, Rome, Radboud University, the Netherlands, and Centre Severus, Paris. He has specialized in theory. He has authored 4 books, including FAQs on research in literature and language in 2019, and has edited 2. He is the founder editor of peer-reviewed journal called Gandhigram Literary Review. He has published 52 articles in various refereed journals and 8 book reviews, and has completed 1 major UGC project and 2 minor research projects. He was a visiting professor of philosophy at Satyanalayam, affiliated to University of Madras, Chennai during 2009-2012, and taught a course on philosophical hermeneutics. In February 2016, he was at the Department of English, Osmania University, Hyderabad, as a visiting professor of English and delivered a series of lectures. He regularly lectures at UGC HRDCs and has delivered 12 endowment lectures in different universities in South India. He was a member of the Research Council of IGNOU, New Delhi, from 2007 to 2013. And its Academic Council from 2013 to 2015. Professor Dorairaj is an assessor for NAC since 2010 and has assessed and accredited 32 colleges in different parts of India, 13 as the chairperson of the NAC peer team, and was involved in the preparation of NAC Revised Accreditation Framework 2017. He has completed 2 major assignments for UPSC. His achievements are endless, but time curtails me from mentioning more. We are privileged to have you as our resource person today. It's my pleasure to invite you for the first lecture series. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, dear friends. I am happy to meet you online. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizer.
Sir, you are muted.
Yes. Good evening, dear friends. I am happy to meet you online. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers for having come up with this idea of organizing this program on research methodology and academic writing. My hearty congratulations to the organizers for having thought of such a venture to help the research scholars. I am sure it will be useful to them. I would like to thank the head of the Department of English, Sri Sankara College, Kalady, Dr. Anjana Shankar, for inviting me to deliver the inaugural lecture. I also thank the Director of IQAC, Sri Sankara College, Kalady, Dr. Preeti Nair, the Joint Coordinator of this program, Dr. K. Kairali, and I thank in a special way Dr. C.P. Jaishankar and Dr. Mini. So, dear friends, my lecture is titled Navigating Issues in Research, and I plan to speak for 1 hour. I'll be making a PowerPoint presentation. After the PowerPoint presentation, we will have a question and answer session where you can raise your questions. I'll share with you my PPT. Dr. Kairali, is my PPT visible?
Yes, it is visible. You could put it on slideshow. Yes, now it's
okay, fine. Okay. So, dear friends, the topic of my presentation is where do they go wrong? Where do research scholars go wrong? Navigating issues in research. This is the topic for today's presentation. And this presentation is divided into 3 units or 3 modules. In the first unit, I will be talking about what is research, not only from a literary point of view, but also from an applied linguistics point of view. In the second unit, which is the core of my presentation, I'll be talking about 50 problems that research scholars encounter in the pursuit of research. And I have titled the second unit of my presentation as Navigating Issues in Research. In the last unit, which is a very brief presentation, there is only 1 slide for the last unit. I'll be talking about the characteristics, some of the important characteristics of a good thesis. So this is the scheme of my presentation. What is research? That would be the first unit. What are the problems that research scholars face in the pursuit of research? And how should we navigate such issues? That constitutes the second unit. And towards the end, I would be outlining the salient features of a good thesis. Now, the first 3 slides, they talk about research from a general point of view. The first slide would talk about research from a literary point of view, and the following slide would talk about research from an applied linguistics point of view. So we have 2 slides talking about what is research. One is from a literary point of view, the other is from a linguistics point of view. Now please take a look at this slide. This talks about what is research. How do we define research? Okay, as we all know, whether we are undertaking research in the field of chemistry or the field of life sciences or the field of languages, we all know that research is a search for knowledge. It is a quest for knowledge. And this is not a random search or a random quest, but it is a systematic or a scientific investigation. And during this investigation, we as research scholars, what we do is we try to explore something. It could be an idea, it could be a thesis, or it could be a proposition. Now, why do we undertake this exploration? What is the purpose? What is the objective? The idea is to know more about a given phenomenon or a given topic or a given author or a text. For instance, if I am researching on feminism, I would like to know more about feminism, not only Anglo-American feminism, but also French feminism, Indian feminism. So that would be my standpoint. If I am researching, let us say, on the novels of Paulo Coelho, the Brazilian novelist, I would like to know more about Paulo Coelho, his background, the novels that he has written, his autobiographies, the major themes that he talks about. So therefore, research is a search or quest for knowledge. It is a systematic or a scientific process of investigation or exploration of an idea or a thesis or a proposition or a hypothesis which has been undertaken with a view to knowing more about a given phenomenon, a given topic, a particular author, or the text of a particular author. Now look at the second part of the definition. This is interesting. While undertaking this kind of a research or while undertaking this kind of an exploration of a phenomenon or a topic or an author or a text, we should bear in mind that there should be some originality. So therefore, the point that I would like to underline is this. The emphasis is on acquiring knowledge through a systematic inquiry. Please bear in mind that this inquiry has to be fresh, has to be original, has to be insightful. And ultimately, the whole idea of undertaking research is we need to contribute to a particular domain of knowledge. If I am doing research, let us say in the field of post-colonialism, I should have added something, at least a couple of insights to the field of post-colonialism. If I am doing research, let us say on myth studies, I should have contributed by the end of my research process some insights to that particular field. So therefore, dear friends, this is how I would like to define research from a broad point of view. And this would apply largely to English studies, largely to literary studies. Now, I am aware that maybe there are some scholars who are doing research in the field of linguistics, particularly applied linguistics, ELT. So as far as ELT is concerned, we have a slightly different approach. We have a slightly different methodology. And I have a quote here, and this quote has been taken from Newnan's book published by Cambridge University Press. And the title of the book is Research Methods in Language Learning. Now, basically, fundamentally, there is a key difference. There is an important difference between research in literature and research in language. Research in language is largely empirical. It has to do with hard data. So therefore, we need to think of a different approach, a different perspective when it comes to defining or when it comes to talking about research in the domain of English language teaching. Now, Newnan would define research as follows. He says research is a systematic process of inquiry consisting of three elements and components. Now, what are the three elements or what are the three components that Newnan talks of? He says you start with a hypothesis, you start with a question, you start with a research problem. Now, you have to either prove your hypothesis or you have to disprove your hypothesis. Either way, you need to collect data, empirical data, hard data. Okay, so you start with a hypothesis like you're an English teacher and you're teaching at the school level or at the college level. It could be in Kerala, it could be in Tamil Nadu, it could be in Telangana or Andhra Pradesh. You realize or you find out that students have problem with syntax, particularly when they write in English. Then you have a hunch, you hypothesize. Maybe the syntactical structure of Telugu or Malayalam or Tamil is different from the syntactical structure and pattern of English. So therefore, you realize they could be the mother tongue interference. Now, this is only a hunch. This is only a guess. This is a hypothesis. So you want to explore this hypothesis. So what you do is you collect data. You collect the scripts of a large number of students, maybe from Kerala, maybe from Telangana, maybe from Tamil. And what you do is after collecting the data, you analyze the data and interpret this data that you have collected. And with
Sir, you're muted again.
Yes, sir. Muted.
Sir, please unmute yourself.
It's trying to.
Yes, sir, you would be audible now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I was talking about defining research from an applied linguistics point of view, particularly in the domain of English language teaching. And Noonan would tell us, if you take research in the domain of ELT, you start with a research problem or you start with a research question or a hypothesis. Now, you need to either prove your hypothesis or to disprove your hypothesis. You need to validate your hypothesis. So what you do is you collect data, you collect empirical data, you collect hard data, and with the help of the data, you can either prove or disprove the data. So therefore, this is how Noonan would define research from an applied linguistics point of view. So dear friends, I've given you two perspectives. One is how do we look at research from a literary point of view. The other is how do we look at research from an English language teaching point of view. Now, either way, what happens is the research is expected to be original. Now, here is a quote from Catherine Belsey, and this quote has been taken from her article with the title Textual Analysis as a Research Method. Now, she makes it very clear research should be original, it should break some fresh ground. Okay, so I'll read out the quotation, then maybe I will offer some explanation. Now, Catherine Belsey makes it very clear whether you're doing research in the field of sciences or languages or humanities, you're expected to make a contribution to knowledge. Your research, your thesis, whether it is at the MPhil level or at the PhD level, it has to be original. Now, all of us are familiar with the term original because our teachers tell us that research has to be original. What you write, it could be an MA project work, it could be an MPhil dissertation, or it could be a PhD thesis. Our research scholars tell us that it should be, our research supervisors tell us that it should be original. Now, the problem is, how do we define originality? Now, for a great scientist like Newton or Einstein, okay, originality could mean a paradigm shift. Now, as a researcher at the MPhil level, as a researcher at the PhD level, it is certainly not possible for me to bring in a paradigm shift in the chosen area of research. But still, I need to be original. So therefore, Catherine Belsey says, it does not have to shift the paradigm. We are not Einsteins, we are not Newtons. But at the same time, there has to be some contribution, even though it is quite small. So therefore, she concludes, Catherine Belsey concludes, but research is expected to make a difference to the standard account of a topic, whatever the topic might be. It could be feminism, it could be post-colonialism, it could be hermeneutics, it could be new historicism, whatever may be the area, I should be able to contribute at least a couple of insights. This is the meaning of original. So therefore, dear friends, this is the first part of my presentation. So in the first part of the presentation, I have done three things. I have made an attempt to define research from a literary point of view. I have also made an attempt to define research from an applied linguistics point of view. And finally, I quoted from Catherine Belsey from her article Textual Analysis as a Research Method, where she makes it absolutely clear that research has to be original, but at the same time, she gives us some concession. It needn't be a paradigm shift, but there should be at least a couple of insights. So that was the first part of my presentation. Now let me go to the core of my presentation. So I would like to talk about the major issues or the major problems encountered by research scholars when they undertake PhD research, particularly in the domain of literature and also to some extent in the field of English language teaching or linguistics or applied linguistics. Now, please remember, I am talking about 50 issues. I am talking about 50 problems. Please remember, these are not theoretical issues. These are not issues that I have taken from textbooks. These are the issues that I have actually encountered both while guiding research and also while evaluating PhD theses for different universities. I have valued over 100 PhD theses for different universities all over the country. And what I find is these are the major problems that students encounter in their pursuit of research. So therefore, I have put them together and I would like to share with them. Okay, now the key problem or the first problem is when a student comes to you for research, particularly at the PhD level, you ask the student whether it is a he or she, what would you like to work on? Then the student reels off a few names and also a few topics. But ultimately, the problem is the students, the PhD students, they are unable to decide on the author. Now, what exactly do I mean by this proposition? Should I go in for a well-established author, or should I go in for an author who has just started writing and publishing? Should it be a canonical author or a non-canonical author? They are unable to decide. Or should I choose an Indian author, or should I choose an American author, or should I choose an African author because I am interested in post-colonial studies, I am interested in African writings, or should I go back to American literature, but this time not take a white American author, but an African American author? So what should I choose? Should I choose someone who is very familiar, who is very well known, who has won a lot of awards, whose works have been critiqued many times, or a not so familiar author? Should I go in for original works, or should I go for translated works? As we all know, Paulo Coelho, because I have already referred to Paulo Coelho, he writes in Portuguese, but his works have been translated into English. Or should it be a male writer, or should it be a female writer? So there is a lot of confusion when we talk about deciding the author, because we have made it clear that research has to be original, research has to be insightful. So in that case, the student is confused, the PhD scholar is confused. If I choose an author like Hemingway, he's a canonical author, so much has been written about him, will it be an original work? If I choose an novelist like R.K. Narayan in the domain of English, in the domain of Indian English literature, he is a canonical author. So much has been written about him, and so many PhD theses have been submitted to various universities in India. So, what to choose? So, this is a confusion for many research scholars. Okay. Now, what I would suggest is, I would suggest some 7 points. Now, the first one is, as we all know, most research, whether it is in the field of humanities or the field of sciences or the field of languages, it starts with a hunch, it starts with a guess, it starts with an inspired guess. Something tells you, why not choose these authors? Something tells you, why not choose these particular novels? Or something tells you, why not choose these particular dramas? There is something that I would like to talk about. There is something that I would like to discover. There is something that I would like to explore and articulate. So please remember, most research, whatever may be the domain, whatever may be the field of study, most research starts with a hunch, a guess, an inspired guess. And as I articulated already, all research works, whether it is at the PhD level or even at the MPhil level or even at the MA level, it should be original and it should contribute to knowledge. So therefore, if you want to pursue a PhD program, the first question that you have to ask is, you need to ask yourself, if you have chosen Hemingway, or if you have chosen Anita Nair, or if you have chosen Manju Kapoor, or if you have chosen Nadina Godime, whoever may be the author, you should ask, why one more thesis on this particular author? If it is Hemingway, so many hundreds of books and hundreds of PhD theses have already been written on Hemingway. So why add one more thesis? Am I going to say something different? Am I going to explore something original, something that has been unexplored? So please ask yourself, why one more thesis on this particular author? Now the next is, a couple of years ago, a student came to me and said, I would like to do research. I said, okay. Now I asked him, have you thought of any topic? He says, I'm interested in the novels of Saul Bellow. Okay, I wasn't very familiar with Saul Bellow, but I had read at least one novel of Saul Bellow. But I asked him, like, what exactly would you like to explore with regard to Saul Bellow? He says, I would like to study the Jewish elements in Saul Bellow's works. Fine, I didn't have any quarrel with him. But then I asked him, you're an Indian. Okay, like, what do you know about the American sensibility, particularly the Jewish sensibility? Not that I doubted his capacity or capability. He was capable. Okay, but then the point is, if we choose an Indian author or if you choose a post-colonial author, the sensibility, that is a little easy to handle. But then if you want to explore something totally strange, of course, you need to work very hard. So therefore, what I suggest is, this is only a suggestion, okay, the sensibility matters a lot. If it is an alien sensibility, of course, as students of literature, we have the capacity to get into the shoes of different authors and different characters. So therefore, alien sensibility is not something forbidding or a great barrier. But all the same, when you choose an author and his or her works, please see to it that the sensibility is not totally alien to you. This is what I would like to say. Then the next point is, when you think of deciding on the author and his or her text, please ensure that it is non-canonical, but at the same time feasible. Now, I'll give you one more example. One of my scholars had worked in indigenous literature, so he has chosen some text from some Peruvian literature. But then what happened was the text was not available and no secondary materials were not available. It was certainly non-canonical, it was certainly something original and striking, but it was not feasible. So therefore, you have to make a careful balance. It should be original, it should be non-canonical, but at the same time, it should be feasible. Feasible in the sense, at least the primary text should be available, and because it is research, at least some secondary material should be available. So therefore, ensure that it is non-canonical, but at the same time, it has to be manageable and feasible, particularly when it comes to the availability of materials. And the next point is see to it that it is interesting to you, you are passionate about the author and his or her works. If it is not interesting and if you are not passionate about your research work, then there is a dip in your enthusiasm and you face a lot of hurdles. And finally, when you choose a topic, you please ensure that there is scope for further research and transaction. These are two different ideas. Scope for further research. Okay, so scope for further research, when you do your PhD thesis, the concluding chapter, when you have finished, when you have concluded, when you have summed up, you're supposed to add a couple of paragraphs suggesting avenues for further research. Now, what I would suggest is ensure that there is scope for further research and at the same time ensure that there is scope for further transaction. Now, for instance, you have done your research on the syntactical structures of Tamil and let us say English, a comparative study. Now ask yourself, how many colleges are going to invite you for lectures? Not many colleges are going to invite you for research. On the contrary, imagine you have chosen a topic like new historicism or cultural studies. You are sure to get plenty of invitations. So therefore, dear friends, please remember these 7 topics, and these are important when it comes to deciding the research topic, the author and his or her text. Now, the second problem that I would like to talk about is no proper review of literature and identification of the research work. And in connection with this idea, that is the review of literature, I also would like to talk about very briefly how students delay doing the survey of literature. I will start with the second point, then go to the first point. Now, 6 months ago, it was an online meeting. It was a DC meeting. It was a doctoral committee meeting in one of the universities in Tamil Nadu, and I was the external expert. The candidate made a presentation. It was a good presentation. She did a good job. I was happy and I appreciated her and congratulated her. Then I was talking about, like, please remember that it was a little more than 2 years since the candidate had registered. I repeat, it was a little over 2 years since the candidate had registered for her PhD program at that particular university. Now, when I casually asked the candidate, okay, what about your survey of literature? I am sure you must have completed your survey of literature because you have already completed 2 years of your research program. But to my surprise and to my horror, she told me, not only told me, she told the members of the DC, the doctoral committee, it was an online meeting, that she has not done the survey of literature yet. I was horrified. So therefore, we have to remember ideally speaking, the survey of literature should be done even before you meet your potential guide or potential supervisor. In other words, you should have already done your homework. For instance, I want to do my research on the novels of Paulo Coelho. So even before I go to a university for PhD registration, I should have done my survey of literature. And these days, survey of literature can be done a little easily in the sense. Now, all the PhD theses that have been submitted to all universities in India are available as a digital repository, that is the Shodh Ganga. So all that a research scholar, a potential research scholar has to do is access the Shodh Ganga and find out what are the research projects that have already been done on Paulo Coelho or any author. You get the entire list, and then in fact the entire thesis is available online. So you go through it, you get an idea what has already been done and what is yet to be done, what is yet to be explored. So survey of literature is very important, and please remember two things. Number one, you should have done your survey of literature in the first 3 months or maximum 6 months. Okay. And the second point that I would like to emphasize is, now many research scholars think that you do your survey of literature in the first 6 months and after that you forget about your survey of literature. No, what I would insist is you do a serious research survey in the first 3 to 6 months, but then you continue with your literature survey till you submit your thesis, because that is a never-ending process. You should be familiar. Even after you have submitted your dissertation, even after you have completed your Viva OC, you should still be tracking the recent publications as far as the author is concerned. Fine. Now, please go to the first point. I would like to take you to a very interesting book called The Philosophy of Literary Form, and this is by an American author. He is a specialist in rhetoric, Kenneth Burke, and he talks about, excuse me, is my slide visible?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Please hold on.
No.
Is my slide visible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, fine. I was talking about Kenneth Burke, an American rhetorician, and I was referring to his book, The Philosophy of Literary Form. Now, he talks about research as conversation. Okay, so please allow me to talk very briefly about this concept of research as conversation. Now, Kenneth Burke says, imagine a room filled with people. Now, they started the discussion maybe 2 hours back or 3 hours back, or they have been talking about a particular subject for the last 6 or 7 hours. And it so happens you enter the room, you enter the parlor, but nobody is going to stop the conversation and tell you, listen, friend, this is what we have been talking about for the last 3 hours or 4 hours. So what you have to do is you have to listen carefully and you have to pick up the threads and you have to join the conversation. Okay, so this is the meaning of doing review of literature. For instance, you have taken Paulo Coelho, or you have taken Manju Kapoor, or you have taken Scott F. Fitzgerald. So much work has already been done. So quickly you have to find out what has already been done and why do you do the survey of literature, so that you can take the conversation forward. So that is the idea of survey of literature. So the first two ideas, they talk about the survey of literature. Next, I would like to talk about how students are unable to decide the number of texts they have to choose. Okay. Now, I will share with you another anecdote. A couple of years ago, I was conducting a PhD viva in one of the universities, and it was a British novelist. I don't want to name the novelist. She has written a lot of novels. Now, this particular candidate has left out 4 novels. Now, when I asked her, look here is a British novelist. Totally, she has written 13 novels, but you have chosen to research on 9 novels. You have left out 4 novels. Now, is there any compelling reason or is there any convincing reason as to why you left out these 4 novels? Now, the candidate was not able to give me a convincing answer. She said she's not comfortable with 2 novels, and then she thought like 13 novels is a little unwieldy, is a little too much. So therefore, she had to bring down she has to narrow down the number to 9. In other words, there was no logic for leaving out 4 novels of that particular English author. So therefore, now the question is, if I am working on Girish Karnad, should I take all the texts or can I leave out a few texts? Now, this is an important point, and a related idea is intertextuality. So I will talk about both. Now, the first question, if I am researching on a particular author, should I take all his or her works into consideration, or can I limit the choice of text to 3 or 4 or 5 or 6? Now, the point is, please remember this is research at the PhD level. This is research at the doctoral level. So therefore, at the PhD level, at the doctoral level, you are expected to do research on all the texts of a particular author. If the author has written 15 novels, you have to take all the 15 novels into consideration. If it is at the MPhil level, maybe conveniently you can choose 2 novels or 3 novels or 4 novels. But please remember, this is at the PhD level, though, therefore, you do not have an option to leave out certain text. But in some cases, you can leave out some text, and for this, you should have a compelling reason as to why you left out some text. For instance, I am researching on the text of Girish Karnad, and I would like to explore the dimension of myth and fairy tales in the dramas of Girish Karnad. Okay, I repeat, I have chosen Girish Karnad, and I would like to talk about the elements of myth and the elements of folklore in the dramas of Girish Karnad. Now, obviously, I cannot include a play like Tughlaq or the Dreams of Tipu Sultan because they do not lend themselves for such a study. So therefore, I can leave out those texts. Okay, but otherwise, please remember 2 things. Number 1, at the PhD level, a research scholar is expected to choose all the texts of a particular author. Now, if the candidate wants to leave out some text, there should be a compelling reason. Fine. Now, what is this dimension of intertextuality? Now, as students of theory, as students of post-structuralism, we are all familiar with the concept of intertextuality. Intertextuality, as we all know, is a concept that was floated by Julia Kristeva, particularly in the context of Derrida and Derridean deconstruction, where Derrida talks about concepts like a trace and palimpsest. Now, the idea is, in the context of research, for instance, if you have chosen a few texts of the particular author, even though you have limited yourself to a few texts of the particular author, there has to be intertextual references to the other text as well. Now, I'll share with you an interesting anecdote. I think this was at least some 10 years ago. I was in Bhopal, Barakatullah University, to conduct a PhD viva voce, and the candidate had chosen the plays of Arthur Miller. Now, he said, I have taken the later plays of Arthur Miller. Now, when I asked him a question about, I don't remember, I think it was from All My Sons, he said, no, I did not take this particular text into consideration because, as I said earlier, my focus was on the later plays of Arthur Miller. Now, I asked him, now please tell me, you are a specialist in Arthur Miller or Arthur Miller's later plays, or are you a specialist in American drama or American literature? Now, 4 questions. The candidate has worked on the dramas of Arthur Miller. So how do we call him after the Viva? He is a specialist in the early plays of Arthur Miller or the later plays of Arthur Miller, or he is a specialist on Arthur Miller and his dramas, or he is a specialist in American drama, or he is a specialist in... Is my screen visible?
No, sir.
No, sir.
I'm sorry, I'm having some problem with the internet. Okay, fine. So the question is, what is he? Is he a specialist in American literature or American drama or Arthur Miller as such, or only a few dramas of Arthur Miller? This is like a doctor saying, yes, I am an eye doctor, I am an ophthalmologist, but I attend only to the left ear and not to the right ear. Even when I attend to the left ear, I attend only to the problems of glaucoma and not other problems. I mean, this is absurd. So therefore, a research scholar, two things. Number one, should work on all the texts of a particular author, and if for some reason he or she has omitted a few texts, he or she should ensure that there are intertextual elements to the other works as well. Okay, now we go to the next slide. The next slide talks about the theoretical framework. Fine. Now, I would like to share with you another anecdote, and this was a PhD Viva that I attended, a PhD Viva that I conducted in one of the universities in Kerala. And please remember, I am not cooking it up. This is how the candidate opened up his presentation. So he said, please forgive me. Mine is a simple thematic study. I repeat, please forgive me. Mine is a simple thematic study. I have not used any fancy theory such as new historicism or postmodernism. So now the whole question is, should there be a theory? Should research scholars bring in or employ or deploy a theory, a theoretical framework? And what do you choose first? Do you choose the text first or do you choose the theory first? Fine. Now I have three answers. So the first one is, okay, if you want to do a thematic study, of R.K. Narayan, fine, go ahead. Okay, so you're not less worthy. Okay, it is not some inferior kind of a research. Okay, but these days scholars are expected to deploy a theory so that using that particular theoretical lens, you're able to look at the text of a particular author in a better way, and it is for this reason that a theoretical framework is insisted on. Now the second question, what is to be chosen first, the text or the theoretical framework? Now, as we all know, first we choose the author and the text. And once you have chosen the author and once you have decided on what text you are going to work on, then you can think of the theory, because the text should be amenable to the theoretical framework that you have chosen. In other words, the text should naturally lend themselves to an analysis, to an exploration, to an interpretation from that theoretical framework. But I have seen some scholars who say, I want to work on post-colonialism, I want to work on eco-criticism. Okay. Now, even when the texts do not lend themselves for an eco-critical study, they want to force that kind of approach on the text. Okay, and this is unfair to the text, and the text would militate against such violence. So therefore, the text first, and whatever theoretical framework that would be suitable for the text, I think that should be chosen. Fine. Now, the third point that I would like to talk about the theoretical framework is, I have given an example. For instance, a candidate has chosen, let us say, Manju Kapoor. Okay, because these days a lot of PhD theses are written on Manju Kapoor, okay, the Delhi-based novelist, and a lot of PhD works have been written from a feminist angle. Okay, now what do some candidates do? Some candidates, they talk about feminism from a very broad perspective. They talk about Anglo-American feminism, they talk about European feminism, particularly French feminism, they talk about Indian feminism. It gets unwieldy. So therefore, what I would suggest is, you divide the theoretical chapter into two parts or into two divisions. You talk about feminism from a broad point of view, but then you focus on that particular theoretical framework that you're dealing with. For instance, you would like to use Kate Millet's sexual politics as the theoretical lens. Okay, so focus on that. But then you situate Kate Millet's sexual politics against the backdrop of feminism. So feminism, you give a broad overview, then you go to Kate Millet's sexual politics, because that is going to serve as your textual framework, your theoretical lens. So therefore, there is no point in writing pages and pages of Anglo-American feminism, European feminism, Indian feminism, French feminism, a broad overview and the focus on the conceptual framework. Okay, fine. Now look at the third point. When do you actually start writing your thesis? Okay, I have come across candidates in my own university who say that they are collecting materials, they are analyzing materials, they are going to this library, going to that library, meeting this particular professor for insights, for clarifications, and finally 4 years have lapsed, 4 years have gone by. Fifth year, then they start writing the thesis. I have seen many candidates, they put off writing and they come up with all kinds of excuse. Secondary materials are not available, or this is not okay, that is not okay, this is not available, that is not available. Okay, so a full-time PhD thesis is there in the university, let us say for 4 years or 5 years, with MPhil or without MPhil, and he or she only in the last year of his or her research program starts writing the thesis, as a result of which there is a lot of tension because he or she has to beat the deadline. So therefore, what I would suggest is right from your first year. Okay, so okay, I'll put it in a slightly different way. Once you complete your first doctoral committee meeting, then you start writing the thesis. Okay, when I say start writing the thesis, it doesn't mean you're doing the exact thesis as such. Okay, present a summary of the novel that you have chosen. Okay, and once that is over, you go to the second novel, or you go to the second drama, you go to the third drama, write something, or write something of the theoretical framework. In other words, right from the first year, that is, once you complete your DC meeting, your first DC meeting, then your writing should start. Okay, don't wait for the fourth year or the fifth year. Don't wait for like, okay, I have 6 months more, now I can start writing the thesis. No, make writing a habit and start writing from your first year, and you will have less problems. Not that you will not have any problem, you will have less problems. Fine. Okay, now this is an interesting slide. I would like to talk about 4 points. Okay, fine. Now, operational definition. Okay, there is a lack of clear operational definition of concepts. Okay, I'll give you 2 examples. Okay, so the first 2 points I would like to discuss together: lack of clear operational definition of concepts and lack of construct validity. So I'll club these 2 points. Fine. Now, I was conducting a PhD viva in one of the South Indian universities. The topic was a study of slow learners writing strategy. So what the candidate had done was he had identified the slow learners in his college, then some intervention program. He had devised his own strategies, and he says after 6 months their writing has improved, and here are the results. Okay, so he claimed that he had succeeded in improving the writing skills of these learners. Fine. Now, my first question was, you say you dealt with slow learners in your college, first year undergraduate students from all streams, BSc Maths, BSc Chemistry, BSc Physics, and BA English, BA History. Now, I asked him, how did you identify the slow learners? Like, what was the strategy that you adopted to identify the slow learners? Now, he came up with a very strange explanation. He told me, anyone who scored below 50 and below in the first internal test, I took them as slow learners. Now, you please answer yourself. Students, particularly in the first year UG, okay, so he or she has studied largely in the Tamil medium, in the vernacular medium. So he or she has transitioned to an English medium stream. Okay, now this candidate argued anyone who scored 50 and below was a slow learner. Now, this was not acceptable to me. I said in the Indian educational scenario, 50 is certainly not the identity of a slow learner. Okay, so I told him I would define a slow learner as someone who has scored below 20 or below 25. Okay, he said, no, 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 no. As far as I am concerned, one who scores below 50 is a slow learner. Now, we have two problems. One is the definition of the key concept, namely slow learner, is not acceptable. He has one particular version and I have a different version. So therefore, there was a clash of ideas. Okay. Secondly, if you argue that a slow learner is one who scores less than 50, then what happens is you can easily produce better results because you're actually not working with dull or so students. You're working with average and maybe slightly better than average students. So therefore, it is easy for you to show results. Now, I would like to go to the next point. The next point is, now I have seen a lot of PhD theses which talk about the new woman. Okay, in one particular case, I asked that candidate, who is a new woman? Okay, she said one who walks out of a marriage is a new woman. One who challenges her husband is a new woman. One who challenges her in-laws is a new woman. But then I asked her, there is something called construct validity in research, particularly in empirical research, in quantitative research. We talk of validity and reliability. And when we talk of validity, we talk about internal validity and external validity. And an important component, an important concept is construct validity. So who is a new woman? One who walks out of a marriage is maybe a new woman in your perspective, but I asked her, there is a history behind this concept. Are you aware of it? Sadly, she was not aware of it. Then I told her there was an Irish lady called Sarah Grant. She lived from 1854 to 1953. She was a feminist, and it was she who floated the idea of the new woman. Now, in her perspective, an independent woman seeking radical change is an exemplification of a new woman. So therefore, in research, whether you do literary research or research in linguistics, the way you define key concepts should be acceptable. So there should be a broad consensus. You can't define a slow learner in your own terminology, from your own perspective. You can't say a new woman is one who walks out of a marriage. There is a history. So therefore, concepts have to be defined in an acceptable manner. Next, I would like to talk about thesis statement. Okay, now many students, they are not able to articulate their thesis statement. Okay, so in my book, I have talked about weak thesis statements and strong thesis statements. Okay, so what is exactly a thesis statement? If you take the MLA handbook makes it very clear. A thesis statement is a single sentence. It should not be a paragraph. Okay, not even a cluster of sentences. It should be a single sentence that would formulate, that would express, that would articulate not only your topic, but also the point of view or the perspective or the standpoint that you're using to analyze the works that you have chosen. So thesis statement should be very clear and should be articulated very clearly. Fine. Now, another major problem that I find in many theses is, now how do you conclude the introductory chapter? I will talk about the structure of the thesis a little later. How do you conclude the first chapter or the introductory chapter? Towards the end of the first chapter, you talk about survey of literature, identification of the research gap, then you formulate your research statement or thesis statement, you articulate your thesis statement, and then you round off the discussion talking about the structure of the thesis. Okay, so what is the structure? You add a paragraph or maybe at the most 2 paragraphs. How many chapters are there? What have you discussed in each chapter? But unfortunately, I find that many PhD scholars do not include a note on the structure of the thesis. So hereafter, please include a note on the structure of the thesis. It could be a single paragraph or it could be a couple of paragraphs. Fine. Now, please look at the last point. How many chapters? Okay. I have come across PhD theses with just 4 pages and 140 or 150 pages. In fact, in one of the universities where I was the examiner, I wrote to the controller and asked the controller in university, like, what is the minimum number of pages? Because that particular thesis that I had evaluated for one of the universities in South India, it was, if I remember right, it was only 147. Even though the content was good, the thesis, I think it ran to only 147 pages, so I was not very sure. So therefore, I wrote to the controller. The controller also was not able to give me a convincing answer. Anyway, I passed the thesis because it was a good thesis, the content was good. But I was certainly unhappy that it was only 147 pages. Okay, so what I would say is, it should cross certainly 200 pages, nothing less than 200 pages. Now, if you ask me how many chapters, okay, I don't have a concrete answer, but what I would suggest is all PhD theses, whoever may be the author, whatever may be the text that you have chosen, all of us know that there should be an introductory chapter and there should be a concluding chapter. So 2 chapters, fine. Now, in addition to the introductory chapter and the concluding chapter, you may have, this is an option, you may have a chapter wherein you talk about the theoretical framework. If it is an eco-critical study, maybe a chapter on what is eco-criticism. If it is a post-colonial study, maybe a chapter on post-colonialism. Okay, now I use the expression maybe. Now, what I meant is, earlier I made it very clear that there should be a theoretical framework. Now, this theoretical framework, it could be a separate chapter by itself, in which case the second chapter could be devoted to a discussion of the theoretical framework, or it could form part of the introductory chapter. Either way, it is allowed. Okay, so let us imagine that it is a separate chapter. So there is an introductory chapter. The second chapter talks about the theoretical framework. Then there could be 2 or 3 chapters. Okay, if you have taken some 10 novels, okay, three novels, 3 novels, 2 novels, 2 novels, or 3 novels, 3 novels, and 3 novels. So you can divide it conveniently. Then you have the concluding chapter. Now, I would like to add one more chapter, the penultimate chapter. I would like to talk about a little later. What is this penultimate chapter? In many PhD theses, I repeat, in many PhD theses, I do not find the penultimate chapter that I would like to talk about very briefly. It is a synoptic reading or a holistic reading. In other words, for instance, you have taken the novels of Manju Kapoor and then you want to employ the feminist theoretical framework. Okay, novel A, you discuss it from a feminist point of view. Novel B, you discuss it from a feminist point of view. Novel C, you discuss it from a feminist point of view. In other words, you employ the feminist framework to study individual novels. But what many research scholars fail to do is, they fail to look at all the novels of Manju Kapoor holistically and synoptically in an integral manner using the feminist lens. Now, what I would suggest is, the penultimate chapter would talk about a synoptic reading or a holistic reading. In case it doesn't run to 30 or 35 pages, you can push it to the concluding chapter. Okay, this is very briefly about the number of chapters. Okay, fine. Now, look at this slide. This slide is an interesting slide because look at the first point. Okay, I am not exaggerating. In more than 60% of the PhD thesis, as I said earlier, I have evaluated more than 100 PhD theses for different universities in India, and I have conducted at least some 60 to 70 PhD vivas in different parts of the country. At least in 60% of the cases, what I found was the introductory chapter was the longest chapter. Okay, please believe me, this is something true. I am not exaggerating, nor am I cooking up the details. The introductory chapter is the longest chapter. Okay, now this is an error. This is a serious error. Now, what I would suggest is, you divide your thesis into 3 components. You have the introductory chapter, you have the concluding chapter, and you have the body chapters. So the maximum attention and weightage should be given to the body chapters, chapter 3, 4, 5, or chapter 2, 3, 4. And the concluding chapter or the summing up should be the shortest chapter, and the introductory chapter should be the second shortest chapter. On no account should the introductory chapter be the longest chapter. But I have come across many instances where the introductory chapter ran to 60 pages, 65 pages, 67 pages, and whatever the candidate wanted to say or wanted to express or wanted to articulate, he or she has packed almost everything into the introductory chapter. Fine. Now, you may like to ask me, because please go to the next point, unable to decide as to what should go into the introductory chapter and the final chapter. I have a slide, but I will anticipate it and I will talk very briefly. Now, what should the first chapter contain? Now, in a similar vein, what should the last chapter contain? Fine. Now, these are only suggestions. You please check with your supervisor and he or she will tell you what exactly should constitute the introductory chapter and what exactly should go into the making of the concluding chapter. Fine. Now, as far as I am concerned, in the introductory chapter, first you talk about the author whom you have chosen. Okay, so which author have you chosen? And what are the works, what are the novels, or what are the dramas, or what are the short stories that you have chosen? So two key components of the introductory chapter would be the author and his or her works, and the theoretical framework that you have chosen. It could be eco-critical, or new historicist, or post-structuralist, or Marxist, or whatever it is. So three key components of the introductory chapter: the author you have chosen, the author's text you have chosen, and the theoretical framework that you have chosen. In addition to these three components, there is a brief discussion. Okay, you need not devote 20 or 25 pages as people in social sciences do to talk about the survey of literature. Very briefly, 4 to 5 pages on the survey of literature, and leading to the location or the identification of the research gap, the formulation and articulation of your thesis statement, and a note on the structure of your thesis. Okay, so in other words, what should the first chapter contain? The author, the author's works, the theoretical framework, the first part. The second part, the survey of literature, research gap, thesis statement, and ending with a note on the structure of the thesis. And how many pages should you devote? Something like 25 to 30, not more than that. Certainly not 60 or 65 or 67 pages. And this is what I witnessed in a lot of PhD theses. Now, in the same vein, what should go into the final chapter? Now, as I said earlier, the final chapter should be the shortest chapter. Okay, it should be around 20 pages. Okay, not skimpy, at the same time not verbose, not running to 30 or 35 pages. Now, what should go into the concluding chapter? Fine. Now, three elements. Okay, a holistic reading or a synoptic reading. If you have decided to allocate a separate chapter, namely the penultimate chapter, for a synoptic reading, then you leave it to that penultimate chapter. Otherwise, a synoptic reading or a holistic reading that can form part of the concluding chapter, plus a summing up of the various chapter and the major insights, and you add a short note towards the end of the concluding chapter, that is avenues for further research. Okay, so this is about what should go into the first chapter, and in the same vein, what should go into the concluding chapter. Now, please look at the last point. The last point is something very interesting. Okay, what I do is, okay, whenever I get a PhD thesis for evaluation, sometimes I do some mathematics. What I do is I count the number of pages. Okay, first chapter, how many pages? Second chapter, how many pages? Third chapter, how many pages? Now, what I do is, the body chapters, please ensure that there is symmetry or uniformity with regard to the length of the body chapters. Now, I am not suggesting that the third chapter should have 29 pages, the fourth chapter should have 29 pages, the fifth chapter also should have 29 pages. Now, what I imply is, there should not be a huge disparity. Imagine one chapter, chapter 3 runs to 33 pages and chapter 4 runs to only 17 pages. There is a disparity. The disparity not only in the structure, but also a disparity in the discussion of ideas. So therefore ensure some kind of a symmetry or uniformity. Fine. This I have already talked about. What should go into the first chapter and what should go into the last chapter. And please look at the last line. Okay, don't say anything new in the last chapter. Okay, because you're only summing up, you're only concluding. Okay, if you want to say anything new, anything radically new, you should have done it already in the body chapters, and the last chapter, the concluding chapter, that is not the place to talk about something new. Fine. Okay, in this particular slide, I'll take another 10 minutes and then I will finish. Now, in this particular slide, I would like to talk about 4 points. Now, the first point I have already talked about. Many scholars, they provide analysis of individual texts, text A, text B, text C, but no way do they provide a holistic reading or a synoptic reading. I gave you the example of Manju Kapoor. Okay, so at least either in the penultimate chapter or in the concluding chapter, the research scholars should talk about all the novels of Manju Kapoor at one stroke from the chosen theoretical framework. Many scholars do not do this, and this is a major gap. Okay, then the second point talks about signposting. What is signposting? Now, when you begin a new chapter, whether it is the second chapter or the fourth chapter or the sixth chapter, you add a note at the beginning itself. While the previous chapter talked about these particular issues, this chapter intends to talk about issue 1, issue 2, issue 3. Similarly, when you conclude that particular chapter, you round off the discussion saying that this chapter has done this, has talked about these issues, and the following chapter will continue the discussion. So signposting is very important. Okay, now the next point is about the number of quotations. Okay, as we all know, students, research scholars are fond of quotations, and in some cases, only extreme cases, this is not something that happens every day. In extreme cases, what we find is, as examiners, we find that the thesis is filled with the quotations and only the connectives are the handiwork of the students. No. Okay. Now, when I talk about quotations, then students ask me, okay, sir, please tell me on each page how many quotations should be there. Now, I don't have an answer. Nobody has an answer. I can't tell you that on page 27 you can have 2 quotations. On page number 73 you can have 3 quotations. Now, what I would tell you is 2 things. Number 1, do not fill your thesis with quotations. At the same time, ensure that there are at least a couple of quotations, because research is research. Okay, so you have to buttress your argument, you have to strengthen your argument, you have to validate argument with quotes from established authors. So therefore quotations are absolutely necessary, they are mandatory, but use them sparingly. So therefore what I would suggest is, as a rule of thumb, maybe 2 quotations per page should be okay. Okay, sometimes it could be just 1, sometimes it could be 3, sometimes it could be 4, no issue. But see to it that there isn't a surfeit of quotations. Okay, fine. Now the last point on this particular slide is, I have come across a lot of candidates where when they come for registration itself, they have finalized the title of the thesis, they also know how many chapters are going to be there, and they have even decided on the chapter headings. In fact, one candidate asked me, she came with the title, the chapter headings, everything very clearly marked out. Then I asked her, okay, you're going to be here for 3 years or 3.5 years or 4 years. So what are you going to discover? Because you have already decided on the title, you have already decided on the chapter headings. It looks like you have your entire thesis ready. So what are you going to discover? What are you going to search? Because it is research. She was not able to answer. Okay, I would like to share the story of my own research guidance. So my candidates, they come up with broad area. Okay, they say Paulo Coelho or Khalil Gibran or Manju Kapoor or this particular Canadian novelist or indigenous authors. So what theoretical framework? He or she has some vague idea, but we discover what framework would be amenable maybe after 6 months, maybe after 12 months, and I decide on the title of the thesis only towards the end, that is after the second DC, because I believe that research is an exploration, it is a journey, you discover, therefore everything has a time. Okay, the first 2 points I have already talked about. Okay, the second point, many students, they merely quote without critiquing the authors and their stance. Okay, now particularly the foreign examiners, the British and the American examiners, because I was talking to one such examiner, he said, okay, students from India, they merely quote to support their argument, but they should also critique a quotation and disagree with the author. They should develop this critical bent of mind. Okay, so that is why the second idea. Now the first idea, okay, so you don't have, as a research scholar, as a writer, as an author, you don't have any right to alter any quotation or modify any quotation, because this is against the rule. Fine. Now, as far as this slide is concerned, my focus is on the last point, indirect quotation. Okay, fine. Now, I would like to talk about two issues as far as indirect quotations are concerned. So, the first point is, what is an indirect quotation and is it good or bad? Fine. Now, for instance, I don't have the book, The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. Okay, but then I would like to quote from Simone de Beauvoir. Either the book is not available or because it is a bulky book, it runs to more than 500 pages. I don't have the time, I don't have the energy. So what I do is I go to Toril Moy's Sexual Textual Politics, which is not only a readable book, but runs only to 200 odd pages. So what do I do? Toril Moy has quoted from Simone de Beauvoir, Second Sex. So what do I do? Instead of accessing the original, I go to a secondary source and take the quotation from the Second Sex and use it. And the MLA handbook allows it. MLA handbook says there is a provision called quoted in. Okay, fine. Now this is an indirect quotation. So what is an indirect quotation? A direct quotation is where you quote directly from the author and he saw her work. An indirect quotation is where you access an author and his or her quote, her writings, via another author. This is an indirect quotation, and the MLA handbook allows the use of indirect quotations. Now, the point that I want to highlight is this. There are two issues. Number one, this being research at the highest level, namely doctoral research, PhD research, you are expected to access the original. Okay, you can't give an excuse that Simone de Beauvoir is a bulky book, 500 pages, I don't have the time nor the energy, or the book is not available. No excuses, because you're doing research at the PhD level, so therefore you should access the original book. But there is another issue, an interesting issue, and this I have found in quite a few PhD theses. Now the candidate quotes directly from Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, but at the same time, the candidate, without her awareness, has access to Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex via Toril Moy's Sexual Textual Politics, and sometimes in the same chapter, and this is ridiculous, and I don't consider it as an oversight. Okay, so this is a problem with research methodology. So therefore, there should be very few indirect quotations. All research scholars are expected to access the original. If for some reason you are not able to access the original, you can quote from an author via a secondary source, and that is called an indirect quotation. But please keep indirect quotations to the minimum. But in any case, certainly avoid a direct quotation and the same quotation accessed via a different author. Okay, fine. Now, this particular slide talks about 4 issues. Okay, the first one is plagiarism. I am not going to talk more about plagiarism because I think there is going to be a lecture exclusively on research ethics. Okay, so that will take care of plagiarism and self-plagiarism. Only one issue that I would like to highlight. Now, quite a few students are surprised when I point out to them this is plagiarized. Now, their argument is, sir, I have not quoted the original. There are no quotation marks, and these are not the exact words of the author. I have written it in my own language. So, therefore, how can you call it plagiarized? Please believe me, this is what some research scholars argued with me. These are my own words. This is my language. I have summarized, I have paraphrased the ideas of the author. How can you call it plagiarized? Now, the point is, both the MLA handbook and the APA, American Psychological Association, they make it very clear whether they are the words of the author in the original sense or paraphrased or summarized. You have to acknowledge the source. Otherwise, it would be considered plagiarism. Okay, then in many PhD theses, the title is not very clear and precise, sometimes too long as well. While the MLA handbook doesn't talk about the length of the title, the APA, Manual of the American Psychological Association, which is prescribed for social sciences and for applied linguistics, it says no more than 12 words. Now, 12 is not a sacred number. What I would suggest is keep it as short as possible. In any case, please remember you're not writing a novel or a short story to have a poetic title or a fancy title. Even if it is a mundane and a pedestrian title, ensure that the title is clear and precise. Okay, the next point is what font to use and what size and what line spacing. Once again, there are no clear-cut rules, but what I would suggest is please use Times New Roman, 12 point and double spacing. Okay, now what some students do is they use 14 point. Now why do they use 14 point? Times New Roman 14 point, and particularly when you use Arial 12 and 14 point, now the examiner gets the impression there isn't much of content. So therefore, in order to increase the number of pages, the candidate has used 14 point and a little more than double spacing. Okay, so these are minor things. Okay, these are minor things, but please pay attention to it. And here I would like to talk about 2 points. Look at the second point. They submit the thesis synopsis without getting the first draft ready and later face tremendous pressure to stick to deadlines. Okay, I'll talk about my own university. In my university, the rule is once you submit your synopsis, within 90 days, you have to submit your PhD thesis. So what I have seen in my own department and in other departments, in a lot of enthusiasm, the student submits the synopsis, but he or she is unable to submit the thesis because the draft is not ready. So therefore, what I would tell my research scholars is, first get the draft ready, the entire thesis, the first draft ready. And once you have got the draft ready, then you can submit your synopsis. Okay, the next point is an important point. Work cited does not include recent entries. Okay, now what I do is whenever I go, wherever I go as an examiner, I literally count the number of entries depending on the year. Okay, so let me spell it out. For instance, a thesis is submitted this particular month, June 2021. Now, what I would expect as an examiner is that there are at least half a dozen entries from 2021 because the thesis was submitted in June 2021. Okay, but in many cases, the thesis was submitted in June 2021, but the entry stopped with, let us say, 2015 or 2014. So there is a gap. The last 4 years, the research scholar has not accessed any material. So in this case, I would like to share with you an anecdote. Some 7-8 years ago, I was talking to a professor from LSE, London School of Economics. So he was the professor of cultural anthropology. Okay, we were talking about PhD thesis in India and PhD thesis in England, particularly at LSE. He made an interesting observation, so that stuck to me. So he said, at LSE, at London School of Economics, research scholars are expected to be familiar even with those books that have just gone to the press. They have not yet come to the bookstore. They have just gone to the press, but research scholars are expected to be familiar even with those works. In other words, up to date. So when you're submitting your PhD thesis, ensure if you're submitting in 2022, ensure that the entry is till that particular month when you're submitting your thesis. Okay, now this particular slide talks about work cited. So whether to use work cited or bibliography, there is a lot of confusion. Please refer to the MLA handbook. The MLA handbook makes it very clear. You're not supposed to use the term bibliography or references. It is work cited. And what should work cited contain? Only those books and those journals from where you have actually cited. Okay, fine. And in many cases, what I find is there are very few journal articles. Okay, so please ensure that there are books, there are journal articles, and there are also electronic materials, electronic sources in your work cited. Okay, this also is about work cited, some of the major mistakes. Now, please go to the last item. I would like to talk very briefly about the last item. Now, in some universities, what I find is, I certainly don't agree with this practice, but in some universities, what I find is, along with every chapter, there is a works cited list. I repeat, a works cited list is appended, is added to every chapter. Then at the end of the thesis, there is another works cited. Now, this is not acceptable to me, and the reason is a thesis is a whole, WHOLE. It is a composite whole. So you do not look at the individual chapters as complete entities in themselves. They are part of a larger unit called the thesis. So in which case there is no need to add or append the list of works cited to every chapter to individual chapter. It should be there towards the end as one single unit. Dear friends, I am more or less completed. Okay, so these are some minor points, ellipses. Now, please look at the second and the third point. I'll be very brief about it. So this is for those who are doing research in applied linguistics, particularly in English language teaching. Now, what I find is in social sciences, in ELT, English language teaching, they use a lot of graphical presentations, visual presentations. They use a lot of bar diagram. They use a lot of pie charts. Okay, they are good. Okay, they are good to look at, and the data is presented in a graphical manner, in an easy to understand manner. But what happens is, sometimes for very simple data, they want to use a pie chart or a bar diagram, which is certainly not acceptable. For instance, there are 400 respondents, out of which 240 were men and the rest were women. Now, you don't need a bar diagram or a pie chart to explain this because the data is very simple. Had there been 6 categories or 7 categories or 8 categories, then you could have gone in for a bar diagram or a pie chart. Similarly, go to the last one. We have simple tables and we have cross tables. Okay, but in many universities where I have valued PhD thesis in ELT, I have not come across cross tables. What they use is simple tables. Now, what are simple tables? Unidimensional. What are cross tables? They are multidimensional. For instance, you take the previous point. There were 400 respondents, 200 were men, and the remaining were women. This is a simple table. This is a simple table. Now, out of these 240 men, how many were from this particular caste, or how many were from that particular caste, how many were from this particular caste? Okay, so when you detail, that becomes a cross table. Now, a cross table is advantageous than a simple table because you can talk about many different dimensions. But unfortunately, the thesis that I have evaluated, they use only simple tables and not cross tables. I am towards the end. Okay, now in quantitative research, once again going back to ELT, what I find is they don't ensure reliability and validity. Recently, I had conducted a PhD thesis. Recently I conducted a viva for a PhD thesis on writing skills. The PhD scholar claimed that he had succeeded in improving the writing skills of learners. I said, like, where is the reliability and where is the validity? Okay, the candidate was not able to answer the question of how reliable it was, the experiment that he conducted, and how valid. When I asked him, can it be replicated, he was not very sure. Okay, then the next idea talks about cooking up data and fudging data. I'm sure this will be covered in research ethics. Then once again in quantitative research, particularly in the domain of English language teaching, when they send out questionnaires, they do not use the proper Likert scale. The Likert scale could be a 3-point Likert scale or a 5-point Likert scale or a 7-point Likert scale. but I have come across Likert scales with just 4 points. Okay, so a 5-point Likert scale is better. Strongly disagree, disagree, neither agree nor disagree, agree, and strongly agree and agree. So a 5-point Likert scale is fine. Now look at the last point. Imagine you're working on the dramas of Mahesh Dattani, or you're working on some living author like Bama, who is a famous Dalit novelist. Okay, if I am the examiner, I would have expected you to interview the author. Okay, maybe face to face, in person, or at least an online interview. Now, you need not agree with all her views and comments. You're not bound by his or her views and comments that transpires in the interview, whether it is a face-to-face interview or the online interview. But I'm sure there will be some insights when you listen to the author, particularly the author talking about his or her own works. So as a research scholar, you are expected to contact a living author. Even if you fail, make a note that the author tried to contact the author, but he or she was not successful. Okay, these are minor terms. Okay, many do not have the concept of a working bibliography. We have different kinds of bibliography: annotated bibliography, comprehensive bibliography, working bibliography, and the working bibliography begins even before you launch your research program and continues till you submit your thesis. And in some cases, there is no mention of scope for further research. And two minor points: if you are using foreign words or even Indian words, diacritical marks are not used. And I have come across theses where the candidate has used terms like Professor Eagleton and Dr. Eagleton, which are not allowed. Okay, I think I have 2 more slides. I will go fast. Okay, now look at the first one, shortening of titles. Now for standard works, the MLA handbook has already given you a list of shortened or abbreviated titles. Now, for instance, a novel by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, The Palace of Illusions. Okay, in one particular instance, this was not a PhD thesis, but an MPhil thesis. The candidate had abbreviated as Palace of. It didn't make any sense. Okay, it could have easily been Palace of Illusions, or somebody abbreviated The Great Gatsby as The Great. It is an insult to the title. Okay, so when you shorten titles or abbreviate titles, please do it with some logic or rationale. Okay, now the third point, sexist language is used. In many cases, the research scholars do not use a gender sensitive language, he or she, his or her. Okay, then the next point is lengthy paragraphs, and I want to focus on the last point. Okay, very often I come across research scholars and their PhD thesis where they have used ordinary dictionaries to define terms. Okay, for instance, the Oxford Dictionary defines myth as, the Cambridge Dictionary defines magic realism as. Okay, in PhD research, this is not acceptable. This is okay for an MA project work, but in a PhD research program, you have a glossary of literary terms and you have so many dictionaries or encyclopedias which talk about literary terms. Okay, so terms have to be designed in a formal way, in a concrete way, and you should not use ordinary dictionaries to define terms. Okay, this is my last slide. Okay, now recently I valued a PhD thesis in ELT for one of the universities in Andhra Pradesh. Now what the candidate had done was he had mixed up MLA and APA. Okay, both for in-text citations as well as for bibliography. Now, because this was a research in ELT, the candidate should have used APA or the candidate should have adopted MLA, but he or she should not have used both, but this was the problem. Okay, then the next 2 points in ELT, especially with regard to writing skills, talk only about statistical difference between pre and post test without showing samples. Okay, recently I conducted a PhD viva on writing skills. Now the candidate claimed that results are there, positive results are there, and he was talking about statistical difference between pre-test and post-test. I said the statistical difference is okay, but where are the samples? Okay, before the intervention, please give us a sample. And after the intervention, please give us the sample. It is up to us to decide or to deduce or to conclude whether his or her writing has improved. Okay. Okay, dear friends, this is my last slide. This is the last unit. Now, what are the features of a good thesis? What are the qualities of a good thesis? I have thought of 7 points. Now, these are not the only 7 points. The list is not exhaustive. Okay, so what I would suggest is these are some of the important ingredients of a good thesis, whether it is in the domain of literature or in the domain of linguistics, particularly English language teaching. Number one, the topic has to be original. I started with originality. I talked about Catherine Belsey, where she argues it needn't be a paradigm shift, but it should contribute at least a couple of insights to the field of study. So it should be original. Number two, the candidate should have a sound critical engagement with the text. In many cases, they produce summaries, mere summaries, not even critical summaries. So you should go beyond producing summaries and you should critically engage with the text. Then there should be a strong theoretical conceptual framework. And in some cases, what they happened is the theoretical framework is strong, but there is no application. So you should have a strong conceptual theoretical framework, and this theoretical framework should be deployed in a sound manner to analyze the individual text. Terms and constructs should be well defined, and in quantitative research, particularly in applied linguistics, data should be interpreted systematically and scientifically, and conclusions should be drawn logically, ensuring that there is not only validity but also reliability. Then your writing should be clear, okay, simple and clear and persuasive. Okay, so don't go in for a jargon filled language, a complex vocabulary. No, your writing should be simple, clear, to the point and persuasive. And finally, I would say, whether it is MLA handbook as far as literature is concerned, or the manual of the American Psychological Association as far as social sciences and linguistics is concerned, there should be a meticulous adherence to the appropriate style manual. So with this, I close my presentation. I'm extremely sorry that I exceeded the time limit. If there are any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you.
No problem at all, sir. Thank you very much. I know it's a cliche to say that it was an enlightening session, but I personally feel that you have addressed almost all the fears and doubts of a research scholar. Now the session is open for questions. You may raise your questions directly, or if you can't access the chat box, you can write it in the WhatsApp group also. So the session is open for questions.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It was a fantastic session, sir. Even an ordinary person can do a research work.
Oh,
I want to ask you a question, sir.
Yes.
About research. So whether to select the text or author, or select a theory first?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't get the second part. Select an author or the text, or
select the theories.
Okay, fine. So what I would suggest is you can work either way. Now, if you are bent on exploring eco-criticism, go ahead. You already have the theory. So what you should do is, now that you have decided on the theory, namely eco-criticism, or it could be hermeneutics, or it could be new historicism, choose an author whose texts will lend themselves to a study from the eco-critical point of view or the post-colonial point of view. So here, obviously, your focus is on the theoretical framework. Okay. But otherwise, in the normal course of things, what should happen is you choose the author and the text and find out, okay, can I look at it from a feminist point of view? Can I look at it from a post-colonial point of view? Can I look at it from this particular angle? Which would be more productive? Which would be more fruitful? Which would be more insightful? Then you can choose that particular theory. So either way, okay, so if you're bent on choosing a particular theory, you go ahead, but choose texts accordingly, those texts and only those texts that would lend themselves to an analysis from that theoretical perspective. Or you can choose an author and find out which theory could be fruitfully deployed to look at the author's text. Okay, so you can work it either way.
Thank you, sir. It is from Kamalakannan, Erode Arts College.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Sir,
you.
good evening.
Yes.
Sir, good evening. I have a question.
Good evening, sir.
What is the difference between a thesis and hypothesis, especially with regard to research in literature? Is there a difference?
Okay, a thesis and a hypothesis. Okay. Now, a hypothesis is an untested thesis, is an untested theory. It is an assumption. Okay, for instance, let me give you a mundane example. If you drink a glass of milk every day for 6 months, your bones get stronger. So this is a hypothesis, okay, untested. So what do? Then you conduct some research. You take two groups. You have a control group and then experimental group. One group is given a glass of milk every day for the next 6 months. The other group, the control group, is not given a glass of milk for the next 3 months. Whatever it is, then you, at the end of 6 months, you study the results, you study the bone weight, the density, the strength, and then you conclude. So a hypothesis is a thesis waiting to be tested. Okay, whereas a thesis is a proposition, a statement that you would like to articulate about a particular author and his or her works. Okay, so this would be the broad distinction between a thesis on the one hand and a hypothesis on the other. So a hypothesis is something untested, yet to be tested.
Yes. In literature, sir, how do we bring this? How do we look at it?
Okay. Normally in literature, we don't start with a hypothesis. In social sciences, they do start with a hypothesis. For instance, in education, in the field of education, they have a hypothesis. So, okay, students who do homework every day are better than students who don't do homework every day. So this is a hypothesis, and they do experiments either to prove or to disprove. But in literature, we don't have hypotheses, but then you can have hypotheses. For instance, you take D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers. Okay, what led to the failure of Paul Morrell? So you can hypothesize, you can float a theory, you can hypothesize that it was his excessive attachment to his mother that resulted in his failure. So in literature also you can have a hypothesis, but generally speaking, only in social sciences you have a hypothesis.
Thank you, sir. Very clear. Very clear.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir. This is Meenakshi Kulkarni from Nagpur. Sir, I'm planning to take up a project on migrant and refugee literature, a study in contrast. I'll be taking up Amrita Preetham, Taslima Nasreen as refugees and Jhumpa Lahiri and Rohington Mistry, those who have migrated abroad. Is it okay, sir? And what points can I take up in this? If you can please help me out.
I cannot answer this question in 3 or 4 minutes. I think this needs a lot of discussion. Okay, now I'm not very comfortable with the way you define migrant literature. Okay, now Rohington Mistry, is he a migrant? I think that is a big question mark. Okay, he can be called, he can be addressed as a diasporic writer, as an expatriate writer, but whether he is a migrant writer, because today, particularly after this COVID and all, the whole concept of migrant and migration has a lot of connotations. Okay, so therefore, what I would request you is, first, I think you clarify to yourself what the term migrant means and what the term refugee means. And what is refugee literature on the one hand and what is migrant literature on the other. what are the salient features of these two types of literature, and what are the similarities and what are the differences. So first, at the theoretical level, I think I request you to do some homework, because there is not much clarity as far as the concepts are concerned. So first, get a lot of clarification and a lot of clarity on these two concepts. Then you can think of the authors and you can think of your further research.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Good
Sir.
evening. Kindly desist from asking questions based on a subject, please.
I'm sorry, two people are talking at the same time.
Sir, it was just.
Hello?
So can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So when it comes to deciding the duration of the intervention phase in ELT research, what are the factors that we have to keep in mind?
Please repeat. In ELT research, when you talk of intervention,
intervention phase, we have to decide on our duration. So while deciding on the duration, what all things we have to keep in mind?
Okay. Now, what I would suggest is, okay, like I want to improve the speaking skills, or I want to improve the writing skills, or I want to improve the pronunciation. Now, I can't conduct an experiment for 7 days, and at the end of the 7th day or at the end of the 8th day, I can compute the results. No, it is not possible. Okay. So what I would suggest is at least a period of 3 months, or to be very comfortable, you do intervention for at least a semester. Okay. Only then some tangible result can be achieved. Okay, for instance, if I am teaching a bunch of students on the right accent and the right pronunciation and the right intonation patterns, I mean, I can't teach these things in 7 days or 10 days or 15 days. I need a minimum of 90 days. Okay, I would say even 3 to 6 months. Okay, not that you have to do a long research, that would be longitudinal research, not that you require many years. Okay, at least a sizable period. Okay, so 3 months would be acceptable. Okay, so what I would suggest is to be very safe, 3 to 6 months. And even during this period, it all depends on how often and how frequently you meet your candidates. Okay, if it is for 6 months, but then you meet the candidates only once a week, then there is no use. Okay, if it is for 3 months, but then you are meeting the candidates 3 times a week or 4 times a week, then I think it is productive. So in other words, the output depends on the input and the intake. Okay, if the input is little less, then naturally the intake and ultimately the output also will be much less. Okay, so therefore a safe answer would be the duration could be for a minimum 3 months and a maximum 6 months. So I think that would be a safe time zone for you.
Thank you, sir. One more doubt. When it comes to the development of speaking skills, for example, so today it is a specialization era. So do we have to focus on just developing the fluency alone, or taking speaking skills together, including accuracy, coherence like factors?
Okay, fine. Okay, now when it comes to speaking skills, we have the dichotomy, or we have the binary opposition between fluency on the one hand and accuracy on the other. Now, the earlier methods of ELT, particularly the grammar translation, the audio lingual and other methods, they focused on accuracy, whereas CLT, communicative language teaching, they focus on fluency. Their argument is first encourage them to speak. Okay, don't worry if they commit errors, if the errors could be grammatical or related to pronunciation. First, let them gain confidence and speak. Let there be fluency, then you can talk of accuracy. So if your theoretical framework is CLT, communicative language teaching, then your focus should be on fluency, but not at the cost of accuracy. Initial stages, it is fluency. Then later stages, you should incorporate accuracy as well.
Thank you so much,
sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Sir, am I audible? I am Anjana.
Yes.
Sir, there are 2 doubts raised by the participants of the WhatsApp group. One is how can you improve the critical thinking? What are the techniques? Second one.
Okay. I'll answer the first one. How can you improve the critical thinking? Okay, fine. Now, I am sure you are familiar with University News, a publication, a weekly publication of the Consortium of Indian Association of Indian Universities. They bring out a journal called University News. In the latest issue, my article has been included, and it is on critical thinking and 7 strategies for improving the critical thinking of students. I don't have the time now to talk about all the 7 strategies. So please refer the candidate to the article on critical thinking and the 7 strategies to enhance the critical thinking of students that was published in the latest issue of University News. Thank you.
Then the second.
Good evening, sir.
Please wait. Dr. Anjana has not yet completed.
Sir, these are doubts raised in the WhatsApp group. All of them
yes,
can ask you that. So what is the degree of plagiarism that is allowed in a thesis? Because now there are tools to technique plagiarism, no? So
okay, fine. Now, okay. Now I have 2 answers. Now at the international level, Turnitin is the software that is accepted, whereas in India, I think we used a different software. Okay, at the international level, the protocol is a little different, and at the national level, the protocol is a little different. Now, when it comes to the Similarity Index, I don't have a clear answer because it is decided by the individual universities. I know one particular university which allows a similarity index of up to 30%, whereas I also know about a particular university where the similarity index is less than 10. Okay, so there is a huge gap. Okay, 30 means like it is like indirectly telling you, okay, you can copy, but don't copy too many pages. You can copy a few pages. Okay, so this is indirectly encouraging copying, encouraging plagiarism. So therefore, ultimately, the argument is the less the similarity index, the more original the thesis is. Okay, as I said a little earlier, it is decided by the individual universities. So anything less than 15, I think it is very good. Anything above 20, in my opinion, it is not good. 30 is certainly not acceptable to me, but some universities have accepted this.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Sir, I am Jitendra Kumar Bharti from Jhansi, Uttar Pradesh.
Okay.
Sir, I am working on a folklore of Bundelkhand. So I am new in this field because I was a student of literature, English literature. So, sir, I am not able to decide what and how to apply theoretical framework in the chapter, sir. So,
okay, now a lot of books are available on myths, legends, and folklore. So you please access these books. In fact, I have written a book on myth and literature because my research was on myth, literature, and hermeneutics. So the title of my book is Myth and Literature, where I have talked about the theories of myth and the theories of folklore. And there are plenty of books available on myth and folklore. So you please familiarize yourself with the various theories of myth and folklore. Then you choose a particular theory and you can apply this to the author and the author's works that you have chosen. A lot of books are available on myth and literature. Okay, so if you ask me to name a few books, I refer to my own book with the title Myth and Literature. Then Richard Chase has a book on myth and literature. Lawrence Coupe has a book on myth and literature. Okay, then William Reiter has a book on myth and literature. Okay, so a lot of people have written on myths, legends, and folklore. Okay, so please access them. And also you go to Vladimir Prof. He has produced a brilliant book on the morphology of the folktale. Okay, even if you're not able to access the original book, chapters are available in anthologies of theory. Okay, so a lot of materials are available.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you so much.
Good evening,
sir.
Yes,
Question.
Can I choose different authors' novel with common
No, two people are talking at the same time.
Yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead. Please talk a little louder, please.
Yeah, okay, sir. Can I choose different authors' novel with common theme and concepts for their PhD research?
Okay, you can do that. You can do that. So what you do is you choose a particular theme. For instance, eco-critical elements or post-colonial elements in a few British authors, in a few Indian authors, in a few post-colonial authors. Okay, so you can you can certainly do this. Okay,
Thank
here
you,
the
sir.
binding factor is here the unifying factor is the theory, because the authors are different, the works are different, but what unites them, what unifies them is the theory that you have chosen. You can certainly go ahead.
Okay, sir. Your
Yeah.
recommendation
So
for
I have a
minimum and
question.
maximum
When I'm
novel
publishing
selection for
some,
Now two
PhD
people are talking at the same time.
Sorry,
I
your
have been trying
recommendation
to say
for
for a long time.
minimum and maximum novel choosing for research, sir, for PhD research.
No, there is nothing like minimum and maximum. As I said earlier, if an author has written 9 novels, take all the 9 novels. If a playwright has written 12 dramas, please take all the 12 dramas, unless you have a compelling reason. I gave you the example of Girish Karnad. Okay, if I am talking about the use of history in Girish Karnad, then obviously I have to leave out those plays that talk about folklore. If I am talking about the use of myth and folklore, then obviously I have to leave out those dramas that talk about history, like Tughlaq and the Dreams of Tipu Sultan. Okay, but ideally speaking, okay, you should take the entire canvas or the oeuvre of a particular author.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Good evening,
Yeah,
sir.
Good evening.
the research papers during the PhD tenure. So can we insert those research papers in our thesis?
Okay, now I have two answers. Now, the format is different for science streams and for art streams, particularly for
Yes,
literature.
science
In science
literature.
streams, for instance, if somebody is doing research in physics or chemistry or mathematics, they are required to publish and they put together their different publications, and that would constitute the thesis. Whereas in the case of literature, we have two practices. In my own university, what happens is you are eligible to submit your PhD thesis only if you have produced two articles. You should have published two articles, and you are required to attach these two articles as an appendix. Please remember, only as an appendix. They do not constitute the core of the thesis. They are included as supplementary materials as an appendix. Okay. But what I would suggest is, even as you are doing your research, whether you are in the first year or second year or third year, make it a point to go for seminar paper presentations and publish at least a few papers during your research study. Okay, so you should go for seminar paper presentations, and you should also get your papers published.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I'm working on trauma studies.
Okay.
I have two doubts. The first one is it okay to choose two or three different, texts of different literature in a thesis to compress body chapters?
Two or three different texts means I don't get it.
Texts of different literature in a thesis for framing body chapters?
No, when you say different literature, can you please throw some more light?
Yes, sure, sir. It's like one is of African, and the second one is of American, and the third one is of Israel literature.
Okay, no, you can have, but then you will have to answer the question. The causes of drama would differ from country to country, from race to race. So how do you justify the choice?
Okay.
So you please think about it. You can certainly choose different authors, but what is the connecting thread? What is the unifying thread? Okay, the cause of trauma, the causal factor in one particular case and in another particular instance, they would be different. So how do you bring them together? How do you unify them? Okay, because ultimately it is one composite thesis. They are not individual studies. They are individual studies, but you have to put them together. So how will you put them together? So that is the challenge, and if you can address this challenge, then you please go ahead.
Okay, sir. Okay. Okay, sir.
So is it mandatory to have experimental and control groups for all ELT researchers?
No, if it is experimental research, then you should have a control group and and an experimental group. Now, if it is a theoretical study, then there is no need for an experimental group. Okay, so you have a hypothesis, you want to test it, and then you want to prove something. Then obviously you need to have a control group, and you need to have an independent. You have a control group and an experimental group, and you need to have some variables, and the independent variable has to be exploited.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, when do you want to stop, sir? When do you? I'm Anjana. Sir, when do you want to stop? Are you feeling tired?
No, I am not feeling tired. I can go ahead for another 10 minutes.
Questions are coming up. Yeah, 10 minutes. Okay, sir. Okay.
Okay, another 10 minutes.
Sir, you don't want to overtime. That is why, sir.
Okay, I understand. Thank you for your concern, ma'am.
Sir, hello, sir.
Yes.
Hello, am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible.
Sir, I have a question, sir. Now that I am writing a research article, my question is, while choosing a subheading in, like introduction and then next title, am I allowed to choose my own heading, like some poetic words or something, or I should stick with the, actual title what I have in the paper? Am I should stick with the scientific title or with the appropriate title, sir, like ruled title, something like that?
No, what I would suggest is, I would suggest two things. Now, the title of the essay, the title of the article that you are writing, and the subtitle.
Yes,
okay, you will have many subtitles. They should not be the same. I repeat, the article that you are writing and the many subtitles that you have, they should be different. Okay, point number one. Point number two, you can have your own titles, but then you use the word poetic. No, don't have poetic titles. Have ordinary titles, even if they look ordinary, even if they look pedestrian, no problem. You are not writing a short story or a novel or a poem to go in for an imaginative title, okay, with a lot of connotations and a lot of suggestions. Okay, go in for a simple and plain title.
Yes,
okay.
Sir.
So in fact, I have written an article on how to write a research paper in English. You may refer to it. That was published in University News.
Okay, sir.
Okay, in the last 6 months or so.
Okay.
Sir, this is a question from the chat box. If you had to avoid signposting at all, what would you suggest to be a fair way to open a chapter? And is it not necessary to land each chapter on a concluding paragraph?
Okay, now the signpost, in my opinion, is absolutely necessary because it helps the reader, the examiner, to navigate the thesis comfortably. Now, I live in Madurai. If I am traveling to Chennai or if I am traveling to Kollam, okay, then obviously I would need signposts, where to turn right, where to turn left. Okay, so signposts are important. Similarly, for a reader, for an examiner, signposts are important. You need not give elaborate signposts, a short paragraph. Okay, this chapter discusses 1, 2, 3, 4. That's all. And when you conclude, this chapter has talked about these 3 points or these 4 points, and the following chapter will take up this particular topic. So not only are you providing a signpost, you're also providing a logical connective. Okay, so therefore signpostings are important, but keep it as brief as possible.
Excuse me, sir. How would you comment on the feasibility of research on popular culture and music?
Popular culture and music, or popular culture in music?
Either way.
No, it's not either way. I think you should have decided by now whether it is popular culture and music or popular culture in music.
No, I'm not talking it as a subject that I would do a thesis on just to get. I'm still PG student, but I just want to know how far it is, right or feasible to adopt in future resources.
Okay,
Popular
okay,
culture
okay, fine.
separately or both
Okay,
together.
okay. Now in cultural studies, a lot of research is being done on popular culture, alternate culture. Okay, so in fact, I forget the title of the book. There is a book with the title Subcultures. Okay, I forget the author, but that is a very good book. Okay, so this is certainly a good topic, popular culture and music, or popular culture in music. Now, a lot of books are available. You may refer to those books. Okay, but as a first step, I suggest that you start with this book with the title Subculture. Okay, I forget the name of the author, and you can also refer to Stuart Hall. Okay, he was the second director of the Birmingham School for Contemporary Cultural Studies, and he has written extensively about popular culture, particularly in the context of films. Okay, you can refer to that for some model, some template, and you can proceed with your own models and your own templates later. But that is a good area for research, so you can certainly go ahead. But then you need to locate your exact research. You need to fine tune. You need to, like, you have chosen a very broad area. Okay, you need to narrow it down and make it viable and make it feasible and make it manageable. But it would be, I'm sure it would be a good piece of research.
So in that case, what would be that best way to incorporate the, it's not novels and everything. So what would be best to, or how many, in popular culture, there be movies or songs. So how would we comprise it in the body?
Now, what I would suggest is your broad theoretical framework would be cultural studies. And under the aegis of cultural studies, under the rubrics of cultural studies, you have to narrow it down to popular culture, alternate culture, counterculture, subculture. And there, I think you have to locate your research topic a little more firmly.
Sir, quick question, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Sir, if the research is around an idea, like for example, portrayal of dehumanization and isolation in city living in a few plays. First question, how many plays are ideal, sir?
Okay. Now, what I would suggest is at least half a dozen, 6.
Half a dozen, okay.
At least
and what
half
would
a
be the
dozen,
theoretical
because what I would suggest is this is research at the PhD level. Okay, you're going to have 4 chapters. Okay, in 4 chapters you can't be discussing 2 plays. In 4 chapters you can't be discussing 3 plays. Okay, so it should be substantial. So that is a word that I would like to use, because this is research at a higher level. So something substantial.
Yes.
Okay, so at least
but
6.
it can be only 3 authors, like for example, Dattani, Karnad, Vivek Shanmugh. Is that all right?
Beg your pardon, ma'am?
If I can use multiple writers, right? Playwrights.
Okay, you can use multiple playwrights, no problem. But ensure that there is a connecting thread or a unifying thread.
Yes. And what would you suggest as a theoretical framework for city living, sir?
No, I think recently I came across a book. I forget the name of the book. It was about cities. It was about urban living. And if I remember right, somebody from IIT Chennai has done some research on this, the urban scape and the cityscape. Okay, so maybe if you search on the net, you will get a lot of materials. But recently I came across a book, and unfortunately I don't remember the title nor the author, but it is picking up. It is of a recent origin. You don't get many books, but some books are available, and probably you will be one of the first to explore such themes. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you for that.
So this is a question from YouTube. If the text under research is a recent publication having no secondary materials, how would you handle it? And please shed light with reference to literature review.
Okay, now there are 2 questions. I will answer the first question. If it is a recent publication published 1 month ago or 2 months ago and there are no critical materials, so what should you do? Okay, I don't know if you will agree with my answer. So what I would tell you is either stop your research or postpone your research, because it is research. It is not search, it is research. So which means without secondary sources, without secondary materials, you cannot advance your line of inquiry, because you want to say something. Okay, and whatever you want to say something, you check if somebody has already said, and if someone has already said something, how does your point of view differ from what somebody has already said? So therefore, research has to have secondary materials. Okay, otherwise it cannot be research. Okay, so what I would suggest is you put it on hold. Wait for a couple of months, 2 months, 3 months. I am sure there would be a journal article. I am sure there would be a book review. Or if it is very popular, someone may even write a book. So you wait for your time. I am sure secondary materials will appear. Then you can take a proper research. But then my blunt answer would be, without secondary materials, your research does not hold water, because it is not research, it is research. So you have to research the materials that are already available on a particular author and a particular text, or text in plural.
Hello, sir. When it comes to
Yes.
fields of evaluation, do we have to adapt the existing international scales?
Please repeat.
When it comes to the scales of evaluation in ELT, do we have to adapt to the existing international scales like CAFR, or do we have to develop one on our own?
Okay. Now what I would suggest is, international scales are available, then you can adapt, use the right word, you can adapt it, meaning you can customize it to your context, and this will be validated when you do the pilot study. Okay, so you have taken a foreign model, you have customized it, but then you want to check whether it has been customized properly. In order to ensure the validity of your tool, what you do is you carry out a pilot test, and on the basis of the pilot test, you will know whether your tool is working properly or not, and how it has to be adjusted or modified, so that you can do. But a pilot test is important. A pilot study is important.
Thank you, sir.
Shall we wind up?
So can I ask a question?
Shall we wind up? Are you fed up, sir?
I'm waiting for a long.
No, I think I can go for another 5 minutes.
Hello,
can
sir.
I ask a question?
Yes.
For your generosity.
Sir,
is that okay, sir? Is that okay, sir?
Secondary source other than English?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow you.
So can I use a secondary source other than English language, for example, in regional literature?
Okay, fine. So you can use, okay, now there are two questions. How would you quote from that particular essay or book? Okay, if translations are already available, then there is absolutely no problem. But if translations are not available, then you have to depend on your own translation. Okay, and how accurate is your translation, and how acceptable is your translation? So that is also an additional question that you have to answer. But coming back to your question, you can certainly use secondary materials available in the local language.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Sir, can I ask you something?
Yes.
This is Introductory. I have a question that since UGC guidelines keep changing for publication of research papers, so it is mostly very confusing where to publish and how to publish, and it takes a lot of time to get published, sometimes 6 months, sometimes even a year.
Okay.
So can you suggest a standard method that we can follow for publication of papers? And also, can you suggest some national and international trusted journals based on your experience?
Okay, now you have asked me to suggest some journals, but what is the use? I can suggest a lot of journals, but the UGC care list should include them. Okay, so therefore my answer is, don't go by what I say, or don't go by what A says or B says or C says. Ensure that the journal to which you send your paper has been included in the UGC care list, and it is a dynamic list, because they keep changing. They keep deleting some titles and they keep adding some titles. So as of today, it is the UGC care list. Okay. But now at the international level, what happens is, particularly for science, they have the different criteria, like if it is a Scopus indexed journal, then it is accepted, or if it has been published by Elsevier. Like for sciences, they have some standard yardsticks. Even if it is not included in the UGC care list, they are not worried. As long as it is Scopus indexed, it is fine for them. But as far as literature is concerned, we don't have any parameters as such. So we have to rely on the UGC care list. And unfortunately for literature, the list is not very long. Okay, so as we said, the waiting period is quite long. So I don't have an answer, so we have to wait what to do. Let us hope that the UGC care list includes more titles so that we have more space for publication.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Good evening,
sir.
sir.
One last question. One last question. One last question, sir.
Okay, last question.
Repeatedly, questions are coming in WhatsApp group. Though you have mentioned there, any asking whether it is mandatory that theory should be used, whether you should use theory, You have already said that, but they are asking.
Okay, now what I would suggest is, okay, you have taken the novels of Manji Kapoor, or you have taken the novels of Anita Desai, or you have taken the novels of R.K. Narayan. How would you look at them? Okay, there are many ways of looking at these novels or these plays or these poems. Okay, now it would be helpful to you if you use a theoretical framework, because that would give you a perspective, that would give you a lens, that would give you a frame of reference through which you can look at the novels. Okay, otherwise you get lost. Okay, for instance, you take Paulo Coelho. Okay, you want to look at these novels from a mystical point of view, from a spirituality point of view. Okay, that makes your job easier because that gives you the focus, that provides you the frame of reference. So in that sense, I would argue not only is theory important, but theory helps you in so many ways. In what way does theory help you? Theory helps you by providing a perspective or a framework. Okay, so because the perspective is available, because the framework is available, okay, you're able to look at the works in the proper perspective, in the proper frame of reference. So therefore theory is important, theory is mandatory. But I did clarify that if you want to do a thematic study also, you are welcome to do it. Okay, but these days people insist on a theory, and a lot of theories are available. And if no theory is available, maybe you can evolve your own theory, and using that theoretical framework as a lens, you can critique the novels of the author whom you have chosen. So theory is crucial.
Thank you very much, sir. It was very generous of you to take so many questions. I think we should definitely wind up.
Okay. Good evening, sir. Good evening.
I invite Shruti Francis, research scholar in the Department of English, Sri Sankara College, and faculty member, St. Xavier's College for Women, Alava, for the feedback and vote of thanks.
Thank you, Mincy. Am I audible?
Yes, Shruti.
Okay. Respected resource person of the day, Dr. Joseph Dorairaj, other dignitaries, and dear participants, to talk about today's session, it's beyond words. As Mincy just said, it is not a cliched statement, sir. It is true that it was truly insightful and an inspirational session. Thank you so much. And for as research scholars, especially English literature scholars, we have too many confusions that come along the way that one do research. And of course, we have access to various research perspectives. But when it comes to research on literature, especially English literature scholars, we have too many difficulties and confusions that we face. And hence, the session was an answer to. It was actually an answer to too many questions, doubts, confusions that we had. It truly unveiled the hidden parts of research. It opened the road which is not taken in English research. Thank you so much, sir, for this eye-opening session, that insightful session. And thank you all the participants for your valid queries, which again led to an informative rapport. And thank you, organizers.
Okay. I enjoyed the session. I would like to thank in a very special way Dr. Anjana, because she has been on the phone for the last few days and she was asking me to do the session on research. And I thank you, Dr. Anjana, for the opportunity. I also thank Dr. Kairali, because this morning she invited me and asked me to have a rehearsal so that things go well. So thank you, Dr. Kairali. And I also thank Dr. Jaishankar for the warm words of felicitation. And I also thank the IQAC coordinator. And dear friends, in 2019, I wrote a book. You can see it on the screen. The title is FAQs on Research in Literature and Language. A lot of questions that you had raised, I had already answered them in this book. It was published by Emerald Publishers. The book is available. In case you need copies, you please contact the publisher, Emerald Publisher. Thank you, and hoping to meet you again in some other platform.
Sir, I can vouchsafe for that, because I bought bulk copies of this book for my research scholars and the entire faculty, and they were so impressed, sir. And there are already so many queries coming regarding where we can get the book, and also whether they can be given your email. Some of them are asking for an email, but I don't know whether you'll have time for that, because you're very busy. People keep on pestering.
So please give them my email ID. If there's anything interesting, I will answer them. No problem.
Okay, sir. If you have time. Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so
Hoping
much,
to
sir.
meet you in some other platform sometime.
Definitely, sir. Definitely. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
everything.
Sir.
Thank you
so
and
much.
good night.
Thank you, sir. Good night, sir.
We will wind up for today until we meet for the second lecture of the series on June 24th at 6 p.m. On the topic Research in Literature, an Interdisciplinary Approach by Dr. Priya Nair. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.